What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? So today's questions from the toolbox question. We have a modification of a viewer question that deals with instructor differences. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the individual's question kind of came in line with a video that I did where I showed the downsides to doing certain things with MIG welding, like circle E's and stacking dines, all sorts of stuff, and why, if it's inferior for root fusion and problems, would instructors still teach it to a certain extent? And I have an opinion on that. And one of the things you guys got to understand is that every welding instructor comes from a different background with different credentials, different experiences, and different things that they're good at and bad at. And for me personally, I come from a repair aspect, so I am tasked with repairing a lot of broken and derelict equipment. A lot of other guys might have done production welding out there, and that's all they did. And don't get me wrong, if you can stick weld or MIG weld on standard position, standard plates, you can kind of cross over between like multiple avenues of welding, but the skill set in each one is very particular to that skill. And a great example would be a boiler maker, a pipe fitter, and a steel worker, an iron worker. They all can weld, but on completely different things, completely different circumstances, into completely different codes. So finding an instructor that is literally the best welder at every process out there on everything that you can weld doesn't exist. Therefore, instructors are good at some, not so good at others, and understand a lot of one and not so much of something else. And that's why there's a lot of confusion out there, is because things that are allowed in a welding shop in one area might not even be remotely permissible for another. Like the standards held at a local repair shop are far less than, say, NASA that is building rockets to put people on the moon. So you got to keep that in mind. Now, with that said, obviously there's differences with instructors. I don't consider myself much of an instructor. I'm a hobbyist welder, and I share information with you as I see fit to help you guys out get better with your skills. But there's a vast difference in the instructor themselves, okay? Some people, they became instructors, and they're one of those kind of people that shouldn't be a teacher, because being a teacher is a completely different skill set than being a welder. Much like being a cook and running a restaurant are two completely different skill sets. And there's a reason why most restaurants fail within a year, and it typically isn't because the cook can't cook. It's because the owner, which is typically the cook, can't run a business. So the same thing can be said with teaching. Just because you can do the work that is required of the class doesn't mean that you're an excellent teacher. Likewise, just because you can teach and you can relay information doesn't mean that you're a good welder. And if I were to teach a class on how to cut hair, I would be a moron, and people would basically sign off of that video as fast as possible, simply because I may be decent at teaching, but I'm not great at cutting hair. So there's a certain, like, if there's a bar graph, you need your values of both teaching ability and skill ability to be high enough to where they can correlate and you can get proper information relayed across to somebody. And that's why I think, like, I found because I've been to college for a ton of classes. I have a degree plus, well, I have almost 2 degrees, but that's besides the point. In college, I had tons of what I would call average instructors that were pretty good. I had a few exceptional instructors that were just passionate and loved what they did, and it came off in their work. And I had more than a few that I think that somehow they lied on their application, they got hired, and the school was too lazy to fire them, or due to whatever reason they couldn't fire them, and that they were I don't want to say bad people necessarily, but completely unfit for the job of what they were doing. And that's life, and that goes with all of welding. I'm sure you guys have watched enough YouTube videos to get a feel for people who are passionate about what they do and people who don't really care about what they do. The signs are always there. If someone cares about what they do, they're not afraid to make mistakes. They're not afraid to be wrong and to go back and correct their mistakes. And not only that, if you approach them with a question, rather than just giving you an answer and sometimes rudely giving you an answer, they'll say, well, why don't you think about these 2 or 3 things and get back to me and we can discuss it? Or like in a case of welding, if you as a student go to your instructor and ask for an explanation of why you should do circle ease or why you shouldn't, a good response to that is, well, let's test it and you can make your own opinion, as well as maybe some information regarding when you do it, when you don't, instead of just a blanket, this is how you do something. Because you want to be very careful with welding. Welding is such a complex topic. I honestly think it's the only thing that's more complex is probably psychology. But it's so complex that you can't take an approach of this is how it's done and that's it only, because a simple approach to a complex problem doesn't answer all of the questions of the complex problems. It's far more complex than that, obviously. So anyways, I guess a key takeaway for today's talk is you need to understand that many welding instructors and instructors in general are often put in charge of things outside of their competency range. And not only that, some instructors out there are jaded and just don't want to do what they're doing and don't have the passion for it. Maybe they did at one time, and that happens. And the key thing to do, if you have arguably a bad teacher, bad instructor, still show up to class, learn what you can, and just leave when the class is done, okay? Everyone out there, no matter how stupid you think they are, knows something you don't, and if you can absorb that, you're a better person for it. If anything, you can learn how to be a better teacher by watching people that aren't so good at it. And I don't claim to be good at it either, so don't take my advice on that. But anyway, seriously, there's something to be learned from everyone. And as long as the instructor's making an effort, that's a good thing. And you'll run into those that are just flat out terrible. And I guess absorb what you can, and at the end of it, walk away and maybe look for a better school, better instructor, etc. Or come on YouTube where I'm at, and so many other quality YouTubers are at for welding and stuff in general, where you can learn a lot. And the benefit to me doing this YouTube stuff, by the way, is that if you don't like the video I make, you can click right off of the video and you're not wasting your time. And my information gets directly to the people that want it and need it and absorb it, and then they can make use of it. And there is something to be said to being the ideal student. An ideal student is someone who comes to a class with an open mind, is willing to learn what an instructor has to say, and then willing to do the work suggested by that instructor or that teacher. You know, you can't go to a class saying, oh, this guy doesn't know shit, they're nobody, this girl doesn't know shit. If you do that, you're going to immediately blacklist and block out any relevant, useful information that person has to share that you could use, and you're just going to ignore all of it because of your preconceived notion on the person or whatever. So it's important to be open to learning. You can't have this I know it all attitude. And I'll tell you what, I've worked with a few, not a lot, but a few of the I know it alls, and they're the ones that make the most serious mistakes, because to them, if they know everything and they do it right, but yet they don't know everything, they're going to set themselves up for complete and utter failure, because they're going to not consider certain things. Like, say they're building a bridge, they'll screw up some load calculation because they didn't want anybody's opinion on something, and then the whole bridge collapses because, well, they didn't want any advice, they didn't want their work second looked at by somebody, etc. You get the picture. So you got to be open to opinions and to information, and you can't have preconceived notions that you're the best and that you know it all. Like that's a recipe for failure. So with that said, thanks for sticking around for the video. If you have any comments on this or have instructor stories, feel free to share them. I know I have a whole bunch of ridiculous instructor stories over the years, but I'll save that for another video maybe. Anyways, until next time.